Americans remembered Dwight D. Eisenhower as a World War II hero. In 1952, they elected him president. Eisenhower and his wife Mamie occupied the White House for the next 8 years, a time of unprecedented prosperity. Eisenhower's fatherly image inspired confidence. While singer Elvis Presley provoked controversy. Teenagers adored him. Their parents disapproved. But everyone paid attention when Elvis took the stage. His performances electrified audiences and made Presley a star. During the 1950s, the nation's economy shifted into high gear, providing a higher standard of living for many Americans. From coast to coast, shiny new cars were evidence of increased prosperity. For black Americans, it was a decade of struggle. Blacks challenged segregation laws and demanded their civil rights. Here, white bystanders jeer as a black student enters a newly integrated school. Social change often created strife. Conflict between nations became ever more dangerous with the development of the hydrogen bomb. By 1953, both the United States and the Soviet Union had tested this awesome new weapon. The hydrogen bomb cast a cloud over the decade and increased the stakes in the Cold War, the rivalry between these two superpowers. As the 50s dawned, so did the golden age of television. In living rooms across the nation, families watched comedies, dramas, and sports events. Television news became America's electronic window on a turbulent world. Harry Truman, who was president at the beginning of the 50s, had pledged that the United States would support free nations that resisted communism. This commitment was put to the test. In Korea, communist leaders in North Korea had established close ties with the Soviet Union and China. The South Koreans were allied with the United States and other democratic nations. In June 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea. And the free world raised its voice in protest. Meeting in emergency session, the United Nations Security Council established a multinational force to repel the invaders. The United States and 15 other nations sent troops to Korea. Under the command of United States General Douglas MacArthur at left, MacArthur led a bold invasion behind enemy lines that turned the tide against the communists. But when the outspoken general criticized Truman's war policies, the president took away MacArthur's command. MacArthur received a hero's welcome on his return to the United States in 1951. In a dramatic speech before Congress, MacArthur bade farewell to a nation still at war, saying,
"Old soldiers never die. They just fade away."
Senator Joseph McCarthy of Wisconsin captured national attention by spearheading an investigation to expose alleged communists in government. McCarthy bullied his opponents and misrepresented the facts, causing many innocent people to lose their jobs. His unethical tactics created a climate of suspicion and fear. Honesty and high ideals, however, characterized the presidential campaign of Adlai Stevenson, the Democratic nominee for president in 1952 and 1956. Stevenson, at left, spoke eloquently of America's international roles and responsibilities. The Republicans nominated the more down-to-earth Dwight Eisenhower. Eisenhower pledged to lower taxes, oppose communism, and end political corruption. Rumors of wrongdoing threatened Eisenhower's running mate, Senator Richard Nixon. Accused of receiving money from a secret fund, Nixon made an emotional television and radio speech that restored confidence in his candidacy. The Republicans won the presidential election in November 1952. Fulfilling a campaign promise, Eisenhower, at left, visited American troops in Korea. 3 years of fighting had not changed the border between the North and the South. In 1953, the war ended when United Nations and North Korean negotiators signed a truce. At home, Senator McCarthy's hostile crusade continued. Charging that communists had infiltrated the Army, McCarthy dominated several weeks of nationally televised Senate hearings. His reckless accusations shocked the Army's lawyer at left and much of the nation. Public opinion eventually turned against Joe McCarthy, and he was denounced in the press. In December 1954, the Senate voted to censure him, condemning his actions and ending a dark chapter in American history. That same year, a massive inoculation program was launched to immunize children against polio, a dreaded, crippling disease that struck mainly young people. The vaccine, which was perfected by Dr. Jonas Salk, shown here, brought polio almost under control by the decade's end. During the 50s, American youth made news. Between 1950 and 1960, the population grew by almost 30 million people, the most rapid increase in the nation's history. This so-called baby boom created a demand for more homes. A boom in housing construction provided jobs for thousands of workers. Throughout the decade, the economy remained strong, with low unemployment and stable prices. Earn a dollar, spend a dollar, seemed to be the national motto. Americans spent billions on new products, such as these electric mixers. Home appliances made life easier and boosted economic growth. Congress helped fuel the economy by allocating billions of dollars for the construction of interstate highways. These routes made travel faster and easier for motorists who were buying cars in record numbers. Drive-ins of all kinds, especially restaurants and movie theaters, became a passion for car-crazy Americans. From the comfort of their autos, moviegoers could see Charlton Heston play Moses in The 10 Commandments. Or watch Marilyn Monroe star in a glamorous role. A celebrity both on the screen and off, Monroe became an international sensation. As Monroe's fame spread, so did a new musical sound, rock and roll. American teenagers dressed up to dance to its beat on the popular television show American Bandstand. The program featured hits by singers such as Chuck Berry at left and Elvis Presley. Both men recorded many songs that became rock and roll classics. Presley, dubbed the King by his fans, sold more records than any other performer of the decade. Elvis joins a gallery of famous characters of the 50s. Lucille Ball, Howdy Doody, Davy Crockett, and Hopalong Cassidy were familiar faces in popular television programs of the day. The television program Father Knows Best portrayed an idealized American family of the 50s. Father was the breadwinner, mother stayed home to care for the house and the children. Many families lived in suburbs such as Levittown, New York, in affordable look-alike houses. The suburbs offered many benefits: clean air, space, and security, and seemed to promote uniformity in the lifestyles of residents. On a suburban lawn, neighborhood children play with hula hoops, a fad of the 50s. Hula hoops appealed to both young and old. At play and at work, the trend was toward conformity. A best-selling book, The Organization Man, described how getting along with others had become the key to success in business. Some Americans, however, maintained their individuality. Writer Jack Kerouac was one. His book, On the Road, described free-spirited young people who rejected conventional lives to travel across the country seeking adventure. The young actor James Dean became a hero to youths who did not want to conform. Dean played a young man filled with intensity, but lacking direction in the popular movie Rebel Without a Cause. Black Americans, however, had a cause, and it was the struggle for equality. The economic prosperity of the 50s had passed them by. Blacks were denied equal access to housing and to jobs. And public facilities remained segregated by law in some southern states. This movie theater had a separate entrance for blacks, who were called colored in the 50s, and for whites. In 1954, a case involving segregated schools, such as this one, was reviewed by the Supreme Court. In a landmark decision, Brown versus Board of Education, the court ruled that separate public educational facilities for blacks and for whites were unconstitutional. The decision set the stage for an era of struggle to eliminate segregation in all its forms. In 1956, city buses rolled empty through the streets of Montgomery, Alabama. Black citizens there staged a boycott to protest the transit company's policies. These policies required blacks to sit in the back of a bus and to give up their seats to white passengers. The boycott was led by Martin Luther King, Jr., a young minister with courage and conviction. King believed that nonviolent protest was the best way for blacks to claim their rights and to improve their lives. He became the spokesman and leader of the growing civil rights movement. Social change often brought conflict. In 1957, President Eisenhower sent Army troops to Little Rock, Arkansas, to enforce school desegregation. Soldiers escorted black students into Central High School amid the angry protests of white bystanders. Confrontation at home was matched by confrontation from abroad. Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, who came to power in 1953, sought to expand Soviet influence worldwide. He predicted that communism, the Soviet economic system, would prevail over capitalism, the American system. History is on our side, he said. We will bury you. John Foster Dulles, Eisenhower's Secretary of State, took a hardline stance against communists. Dulles believed that to contain communism, America had to go to the edge of war without plunging into conflict, a strategy called brinkmanship. Fear of war with the Soviet Union prompted a national movement for civil defense. During air raid drills conducted in the nation's schools, students huddled under their desks. The threat of nuclear attack increased in 1957, when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first satellite to orbit the Earth. If the Russians could launch a satellite, Americans reasoned, they could also fire nuclear missiles at the United States. With the nation's pride and defense at stake, Congress established the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA. These 7 pilots were selected by NASA to become America's first astronauts. The space race against the Russians had begun. Students were the astronauts and engineers of the future. To prepare them, Congress provided millions of dollars in federal aid to improve science, math, and foreign language instruction in schools nationwide. During the 1950s, the United States increased not only in population, but also in size. In 1959, Alaska and Hawaii became the 49th and 50th states. In September 1979, Soviet leader Khrushchev, shown speaking, visited the United States to confer with President Eisenhower at Wright. The world watched and waited, hoping for an easing of tension between the superpowers. But these hopes were destroyed several months later when a United States spy plane was shot down over the Soviet Union. Khrushchev was outraged, and the Cold War became colder still. After 8 years in the White House, Eisenhower greeted President-elect John F. Kennedy. In his farewell address, Eisenhower spoke of America's strength, influence, and productivity. But communism, he warned, still posed a global threat to the free world. These were dark words at the dawn of a new decade.